Not too long ago, in a place not too far from my heart, I discovered this memory that helps me recall the power of empathy in the moments of life. And before I share the details of that story, I wanted to have a moment to share this author's note that the content, an earlier version of this content was published in my book, Interpersonal Communication for Contemporary Living. The material, a previous workshop, was supported in part by the National Institute of General Medical Sciences. As I mentioned earlier, not too long ago, in a place not too far from my heart, I discovered this memory. And one of my favorite professors, he said something that I will always remember. He looked at me one day and he said, "I like you. You have an intuitive grasp of the obvious." At the time, I wasn't sure if he was complimenting me or if that was an insult. And then he followed up and he said, "What is not so obvious to the many is obvious to the few like you." And I got to tell you, when he said that, I felt that Master Yoda had kind of entered the building, and I realized that it was a statement of empathy. In that moment, he basically said something that I needed to hear at a time that I needed to hear it. And today, we are being asked to do the same for our students. So there's a picture of Dr. Ellis Hayes at the center, mentoring in 1988 at his home. And to the right is me, back when I had a lot more hair and was a lot more handsome. Flash forward to 2020. I join you today with this webinar that was built on a TED Talk that I did about a year and a half ago, looking at solidarity and empathy in the classroom. And that's the research that I want to share with you today and some effective strategies for doing so. And these are the basic questions that we've asked you to respond to, and Ryan has been very gracious to provide them for you, and I see some of you answering some of these. So let's look at what we're dealing today. Here's a visual that I found on Twitter. A couple of my colleagues found it and posted it. We don't quite know the exact source, but it captures some of the challenges that we are facing. Who do I want to be during the COVID-19 crisis? And there's the fear zone, there's the learning zone, and there's the growth zone. And in the growth zone, there's complaining, there's getting mad. In the learning zone, there's becoming aware of the situation and how to act and evaluating information. And the growth zone, if you notice, is being empathic toward others, learning to thank and appreciate, keeping a happy emotional state to the best of our ability, and looking for ways to adapt. And that's what our workshop is about today, finding ways of navigating conversations that are empathic, that are comforting, and that are student-centered. So let's talk about moving into the growth zone. How do we do it? There are three factors that I think are important. Remember that first question, who am I? What kind of a person am I in this crisis? Who am I in this situation? What kind of a person am I? What is my purpose? What is my motivation in terms of intentionality? And third, agency. What can I do that is helpful? What can I do that is useful? I see in some of the questions, what can I say to graduating seniors? What can I say to students that are feeling anxiety? And those are some things that we're going to address today in a very simple three-factor model. But first, let's create some common ground, okay? First, this is a great quote from Maya Angelou: just because there are certain things happening in life, it doesn't mean that we are reduced by them, talking about the power that we have to control at least dialogue. So I want to create some parameters for keeping it real. One, there are no magic bullets here. I'm not going to give you the perfect solution. These are just some suggestions. This is also an invitation to consider, not a demand to accept. These are things for you to explore. And I love this paradox of transformation. It's not about you and it's all about you, meaning that this pandemic and this crisis situation is not about any of us individually, but what we can do or how we speak is about us, the messages that we create to support students. So trigger warning, you may feel something and that's a good thing, trust me. And please join me on this journey, I invite you. Why is feeling a good thing? And I'm gonna ask my buddy Ryan to kind of help me out with these. So Ryan, are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right, so help me with the first one. All right, what do you think?
Consistent with a phenomenological
There you go, yeah.
and constructivist worldview, I think that learning is informed most directly by lived experience, both vicarious and performative.
Perfect. I love how you butchered that first word because I butchered it the first 15 times that I read it. It adds a moment of levity. Thank you. Here's my second one. I'm going to share this one. As Schotter argues, this view of learning represents a shift away from knowing by looking at to a way of knowing by being in contact or in touch with. All right. How about this one, Ryan? Give it a shot.
I'm pretty comfortable with this one, I think. This latter sense of knowing or understanding is said to dwell in the body. Poliani, 1958. I call
awesome.
This embodied learning.
Perfect, thank you. And then for me, I'm going to take this one. Learning of this nature is essential for the development of personal agency or perceived self-efficacy. And this last one is a bit of a challenge, so I'm just gonna wing it here. To put the point more provocatively, in order to subject a function to intellectual and volitional control, we must first possess it, by Vygotsky, the great learning theorist. And the bottom line is what we're getting to here is establishing points of connection with people from diverse backgrounds. And that's what we're going to do today. And for me, the best way to do this is through empathy. We connect with people by identifying with what others feel. We call that perspective taking. Sharing another person's emotional experience, what we call emotional contagion, and wishing to improve the experience of another person by what we call empathic concern. And this comes from the book that was just published in 2019, The War on Kindness, Building Empathy in a Fractured World. So I want to guide you through a bit of an experiment. We're doing this all the time, and this is something that we're all aware of, but I want you to have an experience, an embodied experience of what this feels like. So here's the experiment. Please follow along. I'm going to ask my buddy Ryan to help us out. What is your first response? How do you feel? What is your first reaction? And my question to you is, do these stories reflect a fraternity culture based on callousness or a fraternity culture based on compassion? So Ryan, can you help us out and read that one from 2005?
Sure. A fraternity pledge died from water intoxication with 4 fraternity brothers present. The house brothers hesitated too long to call an ambulance after the pledge collapsed and had a seizure.
All right, and then how about the one from 2017? Can you help us with that one?
A student died from traumatic injuries to his brain and spleen, which he sustained after he was forced to consume a substantial amount of alcohol in a hazing ritual for the fraternity he was pledging. The pledge fought for his life for 8 hours before house brothers called for help.
Awesome. Now, Ryan, on a continuum here, where would you rate the callousness of this culture or the compassion of this culture? What number would you give it?
I'd say a 1.
Okay, so this is Ryan's perspective. Now, Ryan, imagine taking the perspective of the mother or the father of the young men who died in these incidences. What number would you put, or would you imagine that they would rate on this scale?
I'd say also a 1.
Right, it's pretty low, right? But notice what I had you do in this scenario is I had you articulate your perspective, And then for a moment, I asked you to consider the perspective of the mother or the father of these young men who died. And that's what we're being asked to do today. We're being asked to not only look at our perspective, but the perspective of our students. And in doing so, in this example, we kind of see this movement toward empathy, this movement toward looking at the perspective of the other. And that's what we're being asked to do today, especially in these moments of crisis, to reassure students that things are going to be okay to the best of our ability. Now, this research goes back to some cutting edge work that was done in the late 1960s, looking at bystander interventions, by Latine and Darley, some very well-known social psychologists. And in their classic study, they found that people don't feel responsible, especially in intact groups. And essentially, people don't feel a sense of empathy, a sense of needing to act. And these results were replicated by Brody and Evangelisti in 2015, examining online bullying. So how do we bypass this natural tendency not to be empathic? I like this quote. It's become appallingly obvious that our technology has exceeded our humanity. Excuse me. So I would argue that one of the things that we need to do is reclaim our humanity by focusing on the empathic response. And an antidote to that is this wonderful quote by Martin Luther King. Strangely enough, I can never be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be. And you can never be what you ought to be until I am what I ought to be. Looking at the relational dimension of communication, looking at how we respond to each other in solidarity. So let's look at some common response categories in empathy. What is empathy, and what are some factors that are important in the empathic response to others, especially in times of crisis? Here are the three factors. What is your response, especially to the scenario with the hazing ritual, especially with scenarios today with seniors who are unsure, especially today with scenarios that students have anxiety with their uncertainty, not sure what to say to them. Do you understand what's going on with them? Do you get it or do you not get it? This is an issue of understanding. This is an issue of perspective taking. The next idea is a feeling of concern. Are you feeling a sense of concern, or is there no concern at all? The idea that I feel a sense of concern for the welfare of this person. And we call this factor, we call this variable empathic concern. Lastly is the idea of action or moving to act. Are you moved to do something, or do you think no action is required? The statement might be, I want to do something so that I can be helpful. And this is what we call comforting or supportive communication. And I'm going to take you through each part of this model through an actual dialogue of things that you can say verbally, things that you can say via email to ease anxiety, to have a moment of comfort, even though you may not be able to solve a situation. So then the question becomes, moving to action. How do we do this? What comes next? So I'm going to leave you with this graphic for a moment. Thank you. There's a miracle that occurs. I'm not going to tell you what it is, but hopefully we had a moment of levity. And of course, I'm just teasing. We're going to share with you what the miracle is. I'm going to share a little bit of theory with you to give you some background. Then we're going to get right into practice. I'm going to have some scenarios for you, some actual dialogue to help you out in conversations with students who might be anxious, who might be feeling unsure, who might need some comforting or some support. So I've been sharing with you these three factors, right? Perspective taking, empathic concern, and comforting. These all come from the altruistic model, which shows a motivation to comfort somebody based on a concern for the welfare of another person. And here's a causal model where we have, perspective taking being an independent variable, empathic concern being a mediating variable, and comforting being a bottom line dependent variable. Another way to look at it is there's some type of a stimulus or a scene, and that allows us to have a sense of understanding. And then there's some type of affect or empathic concern, which then leads to a comforting response of some kind. Basically, I understand what the student is going through. I feel a sense of concern for their welfare, and then I move to comfort them by saying something supportive. And we're going to look at what that might be. So here's the altruistic model, once again, looking at perspective taking, empathic concern, and comforting. The difference is here, I'm giving you actual words that I have used, that I've heard people use, that we use all the time to indicate understanding, such as I hear you, I get it, I feel you, yeah, I see, I understand. And then there's empathic concern, where there are statements like, hey, I'm concerned, I care, I'm worried, I feel concerned about this situation. And lastly is comforting communication or supportive communication. How can I support you? What can I do to help? How can I be helpful? What would be useful to you? And as you see, this is a basic 3-step model that you're probably already using intuitively. I'm just making it very explicit so that you have a little cheat sheet, a little scenario, a little template to use with students. I have this on my computer. I have this at home. I have this, as you can see on this PowerPoint. And I use this model whenever I'm crafting an email or crafting a message or preparing for a conversation with students. So I'm sure that I hit these points in conversation to make students feel heard, to make them realize that I care, and to see if we can find a supportive way to help them in a way that is useful, preferable, and kind. All right, so let's practice. Are you ready? Let's try this. How does this work? Let's look at this process in action. So here's a situation I had just last week. I was doing my class via Zoom, as most of us are, and a student said, "Hi, professor, I'm having trouble with the sound on my device. I can't do my presentation via Zoom. What can I do?" And you know what I did? I paused for a moment and I go, and I brought up my little model and I said, wow, what can I say to the student? And I basically said, hey, Jane, I hear you. Hey, I'm sorry that this is happening. I'm concerned that, you may not be able to finish your presentation. Let me think about it for a moment. And I thought, wow, oh my gosh, how about if you call me? I'm at the office. Why don't you give me a call on my office phone and do your presentation via phone? Boom. And guess what happened? Jane gave me a call. She gave me a call at the office and she did her presentation via phone. And basically what I did is I just followed this trajectory. I told her, I hear you, I get it. Hey, I'm a little concerned that you may not be able to do your presentation. I'm not quite sure what to do. Let me think about it. What can we do? Hey, how about calling me? Give me a call on the phone. And she felt ecstatic. She gave me a call, and in about 5 minutes, we were able to do her presentation via phone. So I just shared that as a very basic example of how we can do this with students. And I want to guide you through a couple of other examples to help you see how this works for you. So here's another situation. Hi, professor. I was, somebody said something in class that made me feel kind of marginalized. I'm feeling a bit scared. I don't know what to do. Right? So what could you say here? Can anybody help me with some remote examples using the model that we've shared? So a student comes to you and says, something was said in class that made me feel kind of marginalized. I'm feeling scared. I don't know what to do. How could you use this 3-step model to create a response? I'll just give you a couple of minutes. And again, it doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be an exact replica of every step. It's the idea that you have a statement of understanding, some statement of caring, and then a move to comfort or support the student. And we're just playing with these ideas to kind of get us used to the concept. Great. I saw that. I hear you. I want our classroom to be a safe space. How can I help you feel safe in our classroom? Brilliant. Brilliant. Exactly. Exactly. So again, here's the model, a little reminder. I hear you. I get it. I feel you. I'm concerned. I care. I'm worried. How can I support you? What would be helpful? And boom, here's another dilemma that I've been facing in my class. Hey, professor, I'm having problems at home. I might need to get an extension on that project. So again, just take a minute. What would you say to the student? And you can kind of type it on the chat function, and the same thing. How could you use that model where you articulate that you understand, you articulate that there's a sense of concern, and you move to support the student by asking a question of some sort? And I'll just give you a minute or two. Yeah, I love the comment about the previous one, David. Thank you. I'm sorry you feel that way. Please tell me what troubles you about the comment. Let's try to figure out what we can do so that we can, not repeat the problem. I love that. I'm sorry that you feel that way. Please tell me what troubles you. Let's figure out what we can do so that we don't repeat that problem. Brilliant. I love that strategy. And notice it's a little different, but there's those basic features in there of one, a statement of understanding, a statement of caring, and then a move to resolve the problem. Awesome. Jocelyn, thank you so much. I hear what you're saying. I hear that you're having problems at home. I understand this is happening all the time. How can I support you? How can I help you? What would be useful to you? Awesome. Awesome. Great. Thank you. Thank you. All right. So again, as a reminder, this idea of perspective taking, I get it. I feel you. I see. Yeah, I understand. I'm concerned. How can I support you? On that last scenario, I see one more. I'm sure things are chaotic at home. Thank you, David. I want you to become successful in my class. Let's try to figure out how we can make sure that you can complete the work in a timely manner. Brilliant. So I've had all of these scenarios happen in my class in the last 2 weeks, and I'm presenting them to you. They're very real. These are real students. And that's essentially what I've done. I've allowed them an opportunity to make up the assignment. I've opened up an exam, for example, because they missed the exam, and given them extra time. I've allowed them to do their group project on their own. If somehow their team went ahead of them, I've allowed them to turn in an assignment at a later date. Those are all types of strategies that are, very basic, but today, now at this time, since we are basically in triage, we are doing emergency remote teaching, it becomes critical that we adapt in ways that demonstrate to students that we care and we're willing to adapt. So thank you. Thank you for those responses. All right, so how does empathy work for you? I saw some scenarios up on the webinar. Can you share with me times that you've engaged in these behaviors or a situation that you have made these types of comments to students where you've shown a statement of understanding, you've shown a statement of caring, and then you've moved toward a solution and that it's been helpful for you? So anyone out there willing to share kind of a success story of their empathic communication and how it has worked in a positive way, especially in the last 2 or 3 weeks? And I'll give you a couple of minutes to share those on the chat. Awesome. I'm getting a wonderful message from Melanie, who had a student concerned about staying in the course because they had a new job. And Melanie reached out to her and assured her that if she wanted to do more of a self-study, then she could stay the course. And the student was able to re-enroll and was very excited. And now she's doing really well. So this concern for an individual student, right, created an opportunity for this student to do well. So thank you for sharing that, Melanie. That's a great story. Yeah, thank you, David. David's having a student who is having concerns at home with family matters, and David shared that this is just a class, but you need to take care of your family I'm willing to work with you. And the student was so grateful because he knew that I cared and would assist him in completing my class. Those are wonderful examples, exactly. And part of doing these kinds of workshops, I realized that I'm preaching to the choir, right? People who attend these things are people who are usually doing this type of work already. And, you know, and folks who maybe are not doing such a good job don't attend these types of trainings. So I want to thank you for being members of the choir. I hope you're having a moment of levity listening to me right now and the humor and all this, because I see this happening all the time as I do these trainings here and across the state. Because a lot of times I speak to faculty who attend these trainings or workshops, and as I hear their stories, they're doing a fantastic job of incorporating some version of this type of communication in their day-to-day communication. And they just kind of come here to reinforce what they already know or to validate their experience. So I want to thank all of you who have shared these wonderful stories of compassion and empathy, because that is at the very core of what is needed right now. And you're seeing the positive benefits of that statement of concern, of those that willingness to be flexible by how students are responding. So the question is, you know, what do I do? How do I relate to students? What do I say? My response to you is to do what you already are doing, especially those of you who are sharing those wonderful stories of success. Those success stories are a great tribute to the fact that what you're doing is working. And I think those types of actions are very much needed in this moment of triage, in this moment of chaos that we're dealing with. Being supportive of students, understanding where they're coming from, having a moment of empathy, and moving towards solutions that are useful, helpful, and practical. I had a student email me that she was having trouble meeting the time of our situation analysis. She had to do a presentation and she was going to be third to go, but you know, she said that she needed to do her situation analysis earlier in the class because she had this emergency Zoom meeting for work. So I said, hey, I totally get it. I understand. No worries. We can have you go first. Just remind me when we start Zoom to, to help me recall that you want to do that, right? So when we started the Zoom meeting, I said, hey, Michelle, you wanted to go first. Are you ready? And she said, yeah. And we launched her presentation first. We adapted. She went first. She got it done. She got off the call, and then she was able to join her Zoom meeting for work. So again, that idea of understanding, having a moment of compassion, and moving to be supportive in whatever way works for you and your class. All right. Exactly. I love this comment. To be empathic, we must be flexible and show compassion. Yeah, flexibility is key. And I think that becomes much more of a touchstone today because it is actual behavior, right? When we show flexibility, we're not just talking about empty promises or empty talk. We're actually following through with behaviors, right? Adapting to their need for an alternative exam, or usually for me, an alternative exam time because they missed the exam or they entered send too quickly, or an assignment that they need to do earlier or later, or an assignment that they can't quite do via Zoom, so they have to call in. Absolutely. Thank you, UTC Student Services, for that wonderful, yeah, thank you. All right, I want to move to some final thoughts. And here's that model one more time, moving us from the fear zone to the learning zone to the growth zone. And I've shared this with my students as a template for them as they are managing their own mental health. And I tell them, look, the fear zone is completely understandable. Let's be okay with fear, and let's see if we can move more into learning and growth, and we can kind of be going back and forth. That's totally natural. It's totally understandable, but let's do the best of our ability to show empathy for each other, to thank and appreciate what others are doing, and to look for ways to adapt. Then there is the choice of compassionate action, choosing empathy, choosing flexibility, reminding students to keep a routine in their lives. Absolutely. Showing them that you understand. Hey, I get it. Look, create a routine. Create a routine in your life. Wake up at a particular time. Work out. I'm concerned about you. I care. Here are the things that might be helpful for you. How can I support you? What can I do to help? What might be useful? Right? Excellent. And my question to you is, what's next for you? How can you use this process? And again, I know that some of you are already using this, but maybe somebody that we haven't heard from before. What's next for you, and how can you use this process in ways that works for you, your students, and your community? Thank you, Jocelyn. I appreciate that. I am always an empathic person. I can use this information to be mindful and more intentional. Exactly. That's my great hope in presenting this content, is for all of us to be more mindful and intentional about the messages that we create with students. Every day we have an opportunity to create moments of mindful communication so that students feel understood, students feel that there's a sense of caring, and students feel that they are supported, because sometimes that's all that we can do. is transmit that idea of understanding, of support, and of compassion. Thank you, David. I appreciate that so much, sharing this with other faculty members and the dean, learning mentors, and working with students. And yeah, I see you've taught interpersonal communication for over 35 years. And like you, I agree, it's so nice to hear from other colleagues and to see this validation from you about the importance of interpersonal communication, not just as something that we teach, but something that we do as a practice with our students every day via email, via Zoom, via mediated content. This model is something that I use every single day as a template to help me try to articulate the message of empathy in ways that are safe, sane, humane, and compassionate.
This has been really great, Jose. I plan on using a lot of this in real life too, not just with students, but in my interactions with regular people in society. So it's helpful for
Yes.
me too, a non-educator.
Yeah, well, Ryan, in a way you are, because you're helping all of us educate and send this message out, by putting together, helping me put together this webinar and dealing with my feeble attempts with technology. So thank you. You've been an educator. And I have one more thing to share. I wanted to say that in the midst of all this turbulence, I wanted to really share this message of gratitude. I hope that with all my heart that these words serve as a source of nourishment, as validation and recognition for all that you do for our students. And that's all of you that are here on the webinar today. You are on the front lines of these unfolding events. You are, in a very real sense, first responders of the heart, of the mind, and of the human spirit. So I want to thank you for all that you've done, for all that you are doing, and for all that you will do in the future. There are no words to express the depths of gratitude for what you're doing for our students.